I'm just going to say a few words. I'm supposed to summarize a little bit of what we talked about earlier and then provide a bit of context for this second panel. So, in terms of the earlier session, I mean, the Mentimeter highlighted attendees' shared commitment to sustainability, good jobs, and worker-centered approaches, as tends to be the case in ReImagine meetings. We've got a lot of compatibility in terms of values. Amanda framed our conversation as answering what are the products of the future, the growing markets in which Appalachia can compete. Um, uh, Tom highlighted opportunities in clean energy and shared how Catalyst Connection and other extension partnerships are generating energy supply chain reports so that manufacturers can see where they have opportunities to compete. Wendy and BCAS told us North Central Appalachia is built for the clean economy and still has significant economic strengths. Um, they also identified specific industrial strengths of our region and mapped connections between those and green industries of the future. Ritu from Prosper America focused on the importance of communicating to potential investors in ways that resonate about the assets of coal country Appalachia, our infrastructure, our talent, our industry strengths. And then Amanda at the beginning, but I want to end my summary of the opening session on this point and emphasize that we're looking for broad stakeholder endorsement for our Appalachian Manufacturing Action Plan. That can give us the power to impact manufacturing policy nationally and in the region. And I really do think that those are realistic aspirations because there's not a lot of leadership in terms of policy in these areas, and we can provide some of that leadership and we can have an impact. So here's where I want to provide that additional context for the panel 2 discussion on getting from here to there and to sort of reflect on this particular moment when we're developing this manufacturing action plan. Coal country Appalachia's experience since the 1970s, a half century of policy malpractice. From 1971, when the U.S. after World War II first ran a trade deficit to about 2009, much of U.S. manufacturing policy was so-called free trade. Federal trade policy basically facilitated the movement of investment and production by U.S.-based multinationals to Mexico and then to Asia, including China, so that those companies could supply the U.S. market with using low-wage labor. The Washington Consensus on Trade and Manufacturing Policy began to shift with the Obama administration bailout of the auto industry. The establishment of Obama's Advanced Manufacturing Partnership in 2011 and of Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Institutes began to flesh out a more coherent national policy aimed at enabling the U.S. to lead in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. The election of Donald Trump in 2016 signaled an irreversible bipartisan shift away from open access to the U.S. market and embrace of protectionism as one tool to strengthen future U.S. manufacturing. The U.S. now is beginning to craft a post-free trade manufacturing policy anchored by a grounded understanding of the importance of industry clusters to innovation and competitive advantage. This policy must dramatically improve the effectiveness of the U.S. at translating leadership in scientific and technology fields into manufacturing production and high-wage jobs. So our efforts to develop a manufacturing action plan for Appalachia comes at a moment ripe with opportunity. We can shape emerging U.S. manufacturing policy. We can ensure that it supports Appalachian coal country in capitalizing on what remains a powerful manufacturing base that was not remarkably destroyed by a half century of policy malpractice. For Keystone Research Center and other Pennsylvania stakeholders, including panelist Petra Mitchell, the president and CEO of Catalyst Connection, this is not the first time we've been engaged with the development of state-level, or in this case, multi-state manufacturing policy. In 2003 and 4, at the beginning of Governor Rendell's first term in Pennsylvania, the Steel Valley Authority, the United Steelworkers, the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO, the Manufacturers Association of South Central Pennsylvania, Keystone Research Center, and Pennsylvania's manufacturing extension partnerships advocated together for a comprehensive state-level manufacturing policy. Catalyst and the other MEPs contributed a rigorous study that mapped the industry strengths of Pennsylvania's regional economies and how to build on them. Our efforts led to Governor Rendell's late 2004 manufacturing innovation policy. This invested in manufacturing industry partnerships, increased state funding for extension partnerships, expanded Pennsylvania's national model layoff aversion program statewide, created a manufacturing ombudsman in the Pennsylvania Department of Community Economic Development, created a trade office in Washington, D.C., aimed at more proactively using U.S. unfair trade law to protect Pennsylvania manufacturing jobs, and contributed to the creation of a statewide Center for Advanced Manufacturing Careers with an advisory board drawn from industry. Today, we have consensus nationally and in our region that we need a manufacturing policy. ReImagine Appalachia also has a new partner, the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative, which brings together fellow travelers from across the country that share with ReImagine the conviction that strategic manufacturing investments can unlock future sustainable prosperity. I'm going to hand things off now to the facilitator or moderator for this discussion, Matt Bogosian, who's the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative's executive director. He's an entrepreneurial leader who served as a policy official at the EPA, where he helped to create and lead the Obama administration's Investing in Manufacturing Communities Partnership. Matt leads the AMCC, which is a successor organization to the Investing in Manufacturing Communities. We're thrilled at ReImagine to have Matt as a relatively new partner and look forward to learning from him and our other panelists in the discussion to come up. Matt, take it away.
Thanks, Steve, and delighted to be partnered with you and learning from you. I mean, I think you nailed it, a half century of policy malpractice. And so here we are. I share your enthusiasm, though, Wendy, earlier in the earlier session, your enthusiasm, too. It's going to take a lot of systems leadership. That's one of the terms that we use, of coming together bottom up to advance sustainable development. Like Steve said, I'm Matt Bogosian, Executive Director of the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative, also called AMCC. It's great to see a lot of names. We're the federally designated manufacturing community of practice with stakeholders around the country who engage virtually every week on a free Monday national call and a free AMCC Friday update newsletter, which both of those things have been happening in one way or another for over 10 years. It's a good way to stay connected every week around evidence-based policy, our theory of change to produce priority products. We'll talk about that a little bit here on this panel. AMCC, has this, weekly conversation going on about what our best practices and whatever we produce. And I'll be sharing a little bit to frame the discussion with our expert panelists, is born from input from regions around the country, from stakeholders in the public, private, and nonprofit sector. And so we kind of reflect back for everyone. We're free, open source. We in our newsletter, we have funding opportunities, evidence-based research, lots more. I'm here on the call with our operations director, David Van Sicklin, who I suspect will be dropping items in the chat. You can drop in there how you get our AMCC update newsletter every week. But going on to our discussion about what we can do to get toward strengthening the cornerstone of the American economy and manufacturing from Appalachia, I'm going to frame the discussion with some slides. So, David, if I could call on you to bring this up. This, it's anyone. The point of this is to kind of help get our heads around. I talked about systems leadership, right? It's a little bit daunting for any single person to kind of understand how they can add value and have agency to lift their region, their community around the manufacturing sector. And so this is what we've co-created with many of our stakeholders, to include our panelists here on the call, about how do we strategically attack this challenge to make this an American century with a strong manufacturing cornerstone. So the hope is, and we'll, love feedback, going forward about, this is to help each of us see where we are, to understand where we sit and how we can add value to producing those priority products that could lift companies, workers, communities in Appalachia or otherwise toward advancing sustainable development. So just so to level set. All right. So the first pillar is around key priority industries, and we've shared this with Steve and ReImagine, to inform the manufacturing action plan. And I spoke about this a little bit on our breakout. There is, we got to be skating, to where the puck is going to be in terms of producing priority products in these big and overlapping industries, and the draft action plan is already getting at that, definitely with respect to energy and some of the others. But that's important to have that focus, so that we're, these are key product priorities for long-term American prosperity. And underneath that, of course, is applying new technologies, right? Because there's a proliferation of new technologies. We're in this big, new industrial revolution. So we got to do both at the same time on that pillar. The second pillar is around, okay, from our region, how do we kind of understand the ecosystem of support that are existing, and hopefully a lot newer manufacturers, what subsystems need to be operating sufficiently for those manufacturers to thrive. And so this has been a over 10-year hypothesis that has borne the test of time and experience around what we need to work on, the workforce and training, the research, innovation, entrepreneurship, infrastructure, site development, supply chain support, trade, international investment, operational improvement, and capital access. All 6 of those subsystems, you could break them out. They could be even more than 6 there, and some of them are kind of joined together there, but you get the point. We've developed, and we'll talk a little bit with Nikhil here about the development of a manufacturing community ecosystem metrics tool and playbook, which hopefully can add value to the Appalachia Manufacturing Action Plan. Underneath that, of course, everyone here on this call recognizes that everyone in the region has a role, right? It's not just the manufacturers, but it's the ecosystem of support around all of these subsystems. And then the third pillar is, what are we all driving toward? And this is where our alignment with ReImagine is really strong. And I think it is where, we're going to address this policy malpractice for for decades, right? Is the North Star is sustainable development, around national security, economic, social, and environmental progress, all wrapped together. That's the best framework for making progress in the real world. Those elements are called out in the Chips and Science Act, the bipartisan Chips and Science Act that was passed, and discussing the social, national, and geostrategic challenges we're trying to overcome. And then how do we do that is the sub slide here, and we're doing it right now. Relationship building, storytelling, strategizing, and then morphing that into actions that each of us from our own perch can do in a collective impact MO toward developing better structures that address that policy malpractice that has been happening, that everyone has been sadly a part of, right? From the national government for sure, but our state governments and our local governments, the private sector, our nonprofit philanthropic partners, we all have can look to mistakes we've made in the past. Now it's like, how do we come together with an evidence-based approach to build and create better structures in this country? And so it's with that kind of framework that I'm delighted to introduce our panelists for this discussion, to get their take on how they see Appalachia moving forward. Our first is Petra Mitchell, President and Chief Executive Officer of Catalyst Connection, and then also Nikhil Kalathil, Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives and Research Scientist at Carnegie Mellon University, and also Senior Advisor, a PhD Senior Advisor for Ecosystem Assessment for AMCC. So thank you both for being on here. Let me turn to you first, Petra, longtime partner and leader within the AMCC national community. Tell us a little bit about your perch at Catalyst Connection and how you see advancing Appalachia's manufacturing progress. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. And thanks to Steve Herzenberger, too, with a trip down memory lane. So I do remember those days in the early 2000s and, working in Harrisburg with our delegations and our partners and so forth. And I believe making some good progress at that time to support manufacturing. And um, I think there's opportunity to do that again. So I'm excited about that. So yeah, everyone, you met my colleague Tom Reed on the earlier panel. We're both from Catalyst Connection. We're located in Pittsburgh. We're an economic development organization and the MEP and the IRC for the region. And as Tom mentioned, we have been doing this work for over 35 years, actually, when our program was started at the state level as a response to the decline of the industrial age, to the decline of the steel industry and the materials sectors and those kinds of things in Pennsylvania. And the IRC program was created to help small and medium-sized manufacturers diversify from those declining sectors and continue to thrive and be around and support local communities. And one of the things that, in my experience, I've been here for most of that time actually, is that many times it's been the small manufacturers that have left a glimmer of hope in some of these left behind communities. And what I'm pleased to say is even though it's been a tough time many times, there's been ups and downs for manufacturers. The data that manufacturing is a strong and viable industry in Pennsylvania, in Appalachia, and probably even in this country. In Pennsylvania itself, manufacturing represents 11% of GDP or $12 billion. 9% of all workers work in manufacturing. The multiplier effect is something like 2 to 1. So that's over 1 million people that are good quality jobs as a result of manufacturing. We're the sixth largest manufacturing state. And, who's contributing to these positive outcomes, positive economic impacts? It's small and medium-sized manufacturers. It's those companies that have diversified, that have successfully innovated, that reinvested in their business, stayed in their local communities. 99% of all of Pennsylvania's manufacturers have less than 500 employees. So I think some of the investments that we've made in like the MEP program, the IRC program, workforce initiatives, policy initiatives, they've worked because small and medium-sized manufacturers are the backbone of our economy. They're viable companies. Some of them have been around for over 100 years. And they're growing and expanding. They're doing something right. We have a lot to learn from these companies. They're innovating, investing, and growing. So that's my, positive thoughts for the moment, Matt. And I'll turn it over to Nikhil, and then I'm happy to, just participate in a conversation about more around this topic.
Right. Yeah. Let's have that conversation. And let me turn to you, Nikhil, to talk because we have to bring the best evidence to bear, right? This is not easy. Plus, we're in this international competition with the People's Republic of China that wants to dominate the world and really, change the whole playing field. So we've got to be really strategic and bring the best evidence to bear on how we strengthen our manufacturing cornerstone of the American economy. And so that's why we're so delighted to have you, a scientist, PhD, working with other economists across the country to develop this ecosystem science. Talk a little bit about your perspective, your background, what you're working on, and your perspective on how we bring the best evidence to bear to make the kind of progress towards sustainable development and manufacturing that we all want. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt, and thanks so much to the ReImagine team for the invite. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here today. I am both a researcher at Carnegie Mellon, but also a practitioner in growing and developing regional manufacturing ecosystems. And I think that we just have an incredible opportunity right now at this moment to reimagine how we make things and what we value in this country. Building on what Petra left us with in terms of emphasis on small and medium manufacturers, a lot of my work in this space really kind of ratcheted up and ramped up around the COVID-19 pandemic when we saw a lot of organic entry of small and medium-sized businesses into manufacturing of medical supplies that were in severe shortages in response to the needs of the pandemic. However, at that time, what we also saw was that there was a failure by the federal government and a failure by existing large companies to properly integrate these small and medium-sized manufacturers into the demand stream and actually get these products to the people who need them and more broadly disseminate and distribute these goods and the innovations that individual manufacturers kind of created. And so building on that, we but continued working on these ecosystem efforts because it really does take an ecosystem to connect the dots, to connect the small and medium-sized manufacturers to the people who are going to be buying those products, to the people who are going to be using those products. And you need actors across this full value chain, not just supply chain, but the full value chain to be aligned and in agreement about where to go. I think as I think about this issue, recently I've been doing some, research into history about American manufacturing. And I think one thing that struck me is if you go back to the 1970s and the post-World War II era, we really used manufacturing and industry to help rebuild Japan and Korea and a lot of these other economies. We gave them shipbuilding and nuclear energy and rare earth manufacturing. And they were incredibly successful in revitalizing these war-torn economies. And now, as we sit here in America and have many communities that have experienced the downfall of manufacturing and are declining overall, we have an opportunity, I think, to revitalize these regions and these areas by reinvesting in manufacturing. I'll make three kind of quick comments here about why manufacturing, why do we need policy, and then why Appalachia. Why do I think manufacturing is important? I think number one, I think manufacturing is important because it requires coordination of not just supply chains, but of a diverse group of stakeholders that have a lot of different interests and incentives and operations. And the practice of coordinating this diverse group of stakeholders helps you develop capacity to solve other complicated, hard problems and change how the physical environment and the physical world around you looks. At each stage of these value chain, you have an opportunity to add value and increase the goods that you've been given into something new and transform it. And then finally, there's specific metrics that you can track in terms of cost and performance. And when we think about cost, we think about not only just the actual price of these products, but the energy used to create these products, the labor used to manufacture them and such. And with manufacturing, we can strive towards increasing the performance of the products that we create, as well as driving down the cost in a multitude of dimensions. Why policy? It's because we need to have diverse alignment across different stakeholders that would otherwise be swimming in a bunch of different directions. But when we can align them together with good policy and with good strategy, we can make the whole greater than the sum of its parts and coordinate towards more productive action in general. And then why Appalachia? I think that as discussed previously and as mentioned in the data that we have, there is a lot of industrial capacity in the region and a lot of industrial assets in the region that are very well positioned to make products again. But I think, one of the aspects of this session and this format that I really love is the emphasis on the circular economy, because I do think that we have an opportunity to reinvent how we think about what we manufacture and to really emphasize the circular economy aspects of manufacturing in the region. You can think about, what is going to create a sustainable manufacturing economy. It's going to come across when you have a coordination and alignment between manufacturers, users, and then the people who are going to repair their products and put it back into the system. And you can, again, lower costs and lower energy by recycling and lowering the environmental footprint and the environmental impact of some of these services. I think as we look forward to the future, we don't want to just create another situation where we're mountaintop blasting and causing damage to surrounding communities and, creating pollution and agricultural runoff that we have struggled to deal with. But we want to manufacture in a way that actually helps us move towards a more positivistic and better future for everyone.
Yeah, that's for sure. And thanks, Nikhil. And you see in the chat was dropped a link to the playbook for the manufacturing community ecosystem metrics for regional assessment. So that is under development. We're ultimately with federal agencies and Deloitte and Argonne National Laboratory. We're hopefully going to get to a point where we have an free open source tool to go along with that playbook, and Nikhil is taking a leading role in helping to co-create that. And so, in one of the breakouts, we were talking a little bit about Appalachia's advantages. And one of the things that I know Nikhil focuses on in his research is this idea of clusters coming together, agglomeration, and Nikhil can explain to us what that means. But Petra, you are, kind of part of the Appalachia team, and it is already a self-defined region in many ways. And so in the breakouts that we were talking about, that's an advantage in some ways for Appalachia because it's already self-identified. All those different communities see themselves as a region in many ways. There's also the Appalachia Regional Commission and whatnot. What's your take on how you can build that regional muscle better and be an example to the rest of the country about how you can cross these kind of jurisdictional lines productively, getting all the state governments to work together, getting all the different stakeholders to work together. How do you see that as an advantage for Appalachia? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I mean, I think it definitely gives us more critical mass. We're this broader region. So, for example, the ARC, the ARC-funded ARISE project that Tom discussed on the earlier panel, that's a 5-state initiative that includes 155 counties and 10,000 manufacturers. That certainly gives us more critical mass to demonstrate the importance of our work, of our industry, the volume of companies and so forth. It also helps us, like you said, with stakeholders. Elected officials are critical in helping us to grow manufacturing with various policies, funding, and so forth. This gives us a much larger delegation to work with. And we found that while we were working on the ARISE application and so forth, we had very strong bipartisan support. Manufacturing is an issue that I think we can get strong alignment on. And by working together, like I said, we have a critical mass, a larger volume of people on our team, and a greater opportunity for success that way.
Nikhil, can you speak a little bit about what the evidence is around this idea of clusters? Like what Petra is talking about. What's the advantage of that? Just so the folks on the call are, encouraged that this is not pie in the sky, but there's real strong evidence about the benefits of agglomeration. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of history and a lot of existing evidence around the benefits of clusters and industrial agglomerations. When we talk about industrial agglomerations, what we're really referring to here is communities that have strong connective tissue with one another that allow you to share labor pools, to share knowledge, and to have spillovers from location and proximity to both suppliers as well as customers. And all three of those different externalities kind of overlap and create spillovers from one another that increases the value that an individual place and a location can add. One of the statistics that I've been thinking about a lot recently is that in the rare earths conversation, we only import somewhere between, 100 and $500 million of actual value of rare earths a year. But then that rare earth is transformed into multiple billions of dollars and at orders of magnitude higher of economic value as they're put into motors for EVs, for drones, for wind turbines, and a whole variety of downstream applications. And right now we have a situation where a lot of these supply chains are globalized and are fragmented and are not working together to really drive synergies and drive down costs while increasing performance. When you have clusters that are working together at different parts of the value chain, and especially in a circular fashion, where you can reintegrate end-use supply back into the demand stream, you are able to create a lot more of these synergies, and you are able to increase the cycles of innovation that you benefit from. I think we've seen evidence for this in China, and is the biggest example here, where the Shenzhen economy is basically a giant industrial cluster that operates across electronics, batteries, and motors, in a way that really increases the value for each of those different components and unlocks a whole variety of downstream applications. You don't get access to those downstream applications unless you have access to cheap, effective, high performance supply. And I think that when we're reimagining what US manufacturing might look like, I would argue that the previous era of US manufacturing is what I would call OEM driven manufacturing. So it's coordinated by the large manufacturers, by Ford and GM and the industrial titans. And as we look forward, I think that there's a real opportunity to do a more bottom up approach to manufacturing here, where it's really driven by these supplier ecosystems and these supplier bases that are producing components that are highly effective, that are made in a clean and sustainable way, but then unlock a whole variety of downstream use cases that can be used from all sorts of applications, such as decarbonization or transportation or anything else that you might imagine.
So I mentioned in the breakout session about this opportunity to chime in on what a new national strategy for advanced manufacturing ought to include. And David could drop in the chat the link to that RFI, which is open till December 12th for anyone here on this call or otherwise your organizations or your network to have input on that. But AMCC did some early draft ideas, big ideas, and one of those was to have federal funding for regional collaboration centers where we can build the kind of muscle that doesn't go away in a region. So that coordination Nikhil is talking about and that Petra has led for so many years can sustain, right? Because that is the American way, bottom up, right? We're not going to, we're so, fragmented in so many ways, and it's kind of the democratic way. We're not a top-down society unless we're in a major war or something like that, with the World War II example Nikhil was referring to. So we need to have a new structure in this country that is that enables regions to have sustaining cooperation amongst their public, private, and nonprofit sector. And so, we're obviously in this era of intermittent federal support, I would say, for manufacturing, right? We've had these consortia initiatives. Steve talked about IMCP as one of those, the NSF engines, the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, the Tech Hub program, et cetera. These are good, albeit intermittent interventions from the feds. We need sustained interventions. Petra, how do you see, you've been on the front lines of kind of building that sustaining collaboration muscle. What do we do in the short term? We turn to states and philanthropy or whatever. And what do we do long term? What's your take on how we build that kind of sustaining collaboration, coordination muscle? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And I wanted to just comment before we talk about that on Nikhil's comment about, what's really driving manufacturing. And you're absolutely right. It's not, in this Appalachian region, it's not OEM driven. And I think that's been a positive because we're very diversified here. Just in our region in southwestern Pennsylvania, our survey of our manufacturers, the average manufacturer participates in 4.5 supply chains. And I think that's even understated. And many times, it's the same company, but they're in defense, they're in energy, transportation, even medical device, because we make the kinds of things that are necessary: precision machining, precision manufacturing, the integration with electronics, the kinds of things that were in Wendy's tool, or the tool that Wendy presented. These are foundational components that are critical, like I said, in almost every industry. So that's been very good for this region in terms of, just managing the ebbs and flows of ups and downs, declines in automotive, increases, declines in defense, up, down, those kinds of things. I think that's definitely a strength for us and helps us to build this cluster-based strategy that, we're talking about now moving forward. So you're right. My sort of first foray into this was leading our Greater Pittsburgh metals manufacturing community, an IMCP initiative that was launched in 2015. It was probably part of that whole industrial policy that Steve was referring to, around the time of the Manufacturing USA Institutes, the manufacturing communities, and so forth. We pulled together a tri-state region, multiple partners in all of the key elements of a cluster building strategy. So small business, large business, economic development, workforce development, research, those kinds of things. Capital has been a big issue. Site development, capital for expansions, all part of the team. That work led us to a defense manufacturing community, which I'm very proud of that work because, Pennsylvania is a very large defense state. We're the 7th largest defense state in the country for defense spending. And southwestern Pennsylvania and West Virginia, we have a very active defense supply chain with, significant opportunities for growth there. So that defense manufacturing community really enabled us to do some good cluster building work around defense. And then now the ARC, with the ARISE program and so forth, is allowing us to do some similar things. Excuse me here. So moving forward, I think that is the approach. So we're building clusters. They can be, you don't need one cluster in a community. So a cluster around energy production, a cluster around life sciences. We're doing a lot of that work with the University of Pittsburgh, building out the supply chain and the workforce for life sciences. One that I'm really excited about, actually, wood products and the wood whole working, connecting the wood products manufacturing supply chain to the working forest value chain. We had a whole event on that yesterday. And I think that is going to offer tremendous opportunity for the Appalachian communities. Working forests are a big part of our geography. We have a lot of wood. It's sustainable, very sustainable practices in our forests. And they're looking for more demand. So more demand through manufacturing and other uses. So anyway, so there's a lot of these opportunities, and we can create a model that's repeatable that, again, includes the supply chain. It includes economic development organizations, MEPs, and IRCs. It includes our workforce programs, both from a funding and a training perspective, but also a training delivery. Apprenticeship programs really need to be an integral part of this strategy moving forward. And we need to also connect our high school students into this. We need to start with them. They need to be viewed as part of this cluster building strategy because they're the future of our workforce. And then capital. Capital is a big deal in any type of expansion. We need capital for that expansion. So I'd say, Matt, those are part of that big 6. I think they're still relevant, and I think that's the kind of model we need to build moving forward.
If I can just add two.
Right. Do you see? Please, Nikhil. Yeah.
If I can just add 2 comments to what Petra just explained, I think if you take the example of wood manufacturing, one of the opportunities to really develop a cluster here and the benefits of a cluster is that you're able to use a lot more of the byproducts and the secondary products from such a supply chain than would otherwise be worthwhile to use if you had a more international and distributed supply chain. There's biomass that's generated that can be turned into fuel. There's other sorts of products that can be used to, create resins that can be used in polymers and stuff like that. And so that's when you start seeing crossovers and spillovers that allow you to use these products and these technologies in unanticipated and in new ways. I think Rika mentioned in the chat these examples of battery manufacturing in the region. And again, batteries are such a great technology and an example here because batteries can go into a whole variety of downstream applications. And when there is local supply and local demand for batteries, you can start to create a more synergistic system and a more synergistic cycle that allows you to put out new innovations and allows new companies to put out new innovations. When we think about why the OEM-driven economy was so effective in the past, it's because coordinating supply chains is difficult. And big companies like Ford and Boeing and GM are able to say, this is what we need you to be designing too. And then in previous eras, they would also contribute to workforce development and to community development and to engagement in the areas that they were operating in. When we start to flip that on its head, suppliers and manufacturers are operating without clear directions of where to go and where opportunity is and where demand is. And so our goal with some of the efforts that we've been doing and some of the ecosystem approaches that we've been doing is to basically provide metrics and to provide guidance to these manufacturers to say, hey, here are some high opportunity areas that you could consider expanding to that are already in your skill set. You don't have to do anything new. You already have the capabilities to meet these areas. And then on the other side, it's saying, hey, look at these suppliers. They're producing the parts that you need. You don't need to go to China to do your prototyping. You can do it right here because you're going to get actually the ability to go walk down the street to a factory and test out how this new propulsion system is working on your drone or something like that, and that just unlocks a degree of value and a degree of opportunity that I think is unprecedented, and it really makes me excited about the future of where we might be able to go.
And that's what I'm excited about, Nikhil, because there's this marriage here of the Appalachia region already being self-identified across jurisdictional boundaries, right, as a region that can take advantage of what the best evidence is around agglomeration and prove to the rest of the country that that's the right MO. So we don't have, I think Wendy was talking about it, this kind of bad habit from the 20th century when we were top of the economic, worldwide economic manufacturing, mountain or whatever, when we could do this state by state race to the bottom, we're the best state, we can do it all in our state, blah, 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 blah. That doesn't work in the 21st century. We need to work as a team. We have a lot of important priority products to produce. Everyone, we've got to prove the case that every region can have an important and meaningful role that can lift those manufacturing companies, their workers, and those families in those communities. And so kind of the evidence is coming together with some inherent advantages for Appalachia to showcase the cross-jurisdictional MO. Petra, were you going to jump in there, please?
Yeah, I was just going to say something in terms of just manufacturing growth. Earlier this year, the MEPs in Pennsylvania, we commissioned an implant analysis. So the question was, what will it look like if we could double the average annual growth rate of manufacturing output in Pennsylvania? So the last 5 years, the average has been around 5%. What would it look like if that became 10%? And the implant analysis, the results are compelling and strong. 368,000 new jobs. So we already have 500,000, almost 600,000 jobs in manufacturing. This would add almost 400,000 jobs. $34 billion of new payroll. So that goes right into the pockets of working families. And $12 billion of new tax revenue at both the state and the local level. So, it becomes very real and very practical to policymakers and decision makers, local governments, and so forth, that the benefits of growing a manufacturing sector in your community are real, and they, can really contribute to economic prosperity for your community.
And I think what's awesome about manufacturing here is it's a positive sum game, right? I think that there are so many other sectors that are zero sum games where the winner is going to take all. When Amazon comes to town or selects a specific area, they're going to be the biggest employer there, and they're going to, it is what it is. I think in manufacturing, when you have these local ecosystems that, again, drive down costs and increase performance, you unlock the amount of new products that you're able to build. There's a comment in the chat about, we have a lot of innovation and pilot development that goes elsewhere for upscaling and production. And that's a problem that I've been super focused on lately, because it's true. We do a lot of prototyping and design and innovation in America, and then we just scale it elsewhere, or we produce it at mass elsewhere. And that shouldn't necessarily be happening. And why is that happening? And it's happening in a lot of cases because suppliers currently aren't well suited for the needs of startups. They're not used to making 5 to 10 products a year. They're not used to having to constantly iterate and face these different uncertainties about what product design they're going to be dealing with. And then startups don't have the language to interface with these suppliers because they don't have the design for manufacturing capabilities or tools and technologies. And this is where I think that the ecosystem layer and organizations like Catalyst Connection provide enormous value because they can act as the gearbox between suppliers and startups to help understand that there's a huge opportunity for both sides of this equation to benefit, where when suppliers can get access to local prototyping and scaling facilities and faster lead times and lower costs and higher quality products, they're able to innovate and create products that perform way better than they would if they're relying on international supply chains in certain cases. And on the other side, suppliers that are looking to diversify into new areas or build new products suddenly realize that, oh, we actually don't need to add new capabilities to serve these markets. We just need to slightly tweak how we're doing things and what we're operating on. And all of a sudden, we're serving, not 4 markets, but 10 markets. And isn't that cool?
Yeah, it is cool. And we're at time, you guys. I just want to, share with everybody how solid Petra and Nikhil are and how willing they are to collaborate. And so same thing goes for me and our operations director, David Van Sicklin. Our main intent is to be good partners, with ReImagine and help advance this regional action plan. And so that takes teamwork to do that, interaction to do it. And we're excited for the rest of today, but also in helping to co-create the kind of regional muscle that can really showcase how this bottom-up regional approach can work, deserves more investment from all of the different public, private, and nonprofit stakeholders at every level. So Petra Mitchell, Nikhil Calathil, thank you so much for being on this panel. And Molly, I'll send it back to you.